The Pacific Northwest, mountains covered in majestic forests. Graceful streams flow from ridgetops to the rugged coast. The waters sustain a vast array of life, from tiny amphibians to powerful bears, plus the communities of man. In these currents lives a species vital to all, the Pacific salmon. For thousands of years, there were multitudes of salmon, in numbers now incomprehensible. Salmon sustained the native people, yet still thrived in the virgin world. Then, in the late 1800s, the settlers arrived, beckoned by the wealth of the land and the bounties of the waters. The resources were abundant and nurtured society. As the cities grew, the demands on the land and ocean increased, and slowly, the salmon populations began to decline. Yet their ability to adapt and reproduce allowed them to rebound. But by 1990, their habitat was so damaged and their numbers so few that for the first time, many faced extinction. The commerce and culture of the Northwest would never be the same.
We see a situation now here in this harbor where of the 350 salmon boats that used to provide a family income for fishermen in this community, we now have probably about 25 boats at the most participating in the fishery far away from their home port. It's really a sad story. Now what you see here is the fleet just sitting idle. And this has largely happened because of the decline of salmon populations.
As Indian people, we recognize that our fate will be that of the resources. Our fate's always been that of the resources. When they were in good supply and in good shape, we were in good supply and in good shape. Today, we're not so sure what our future has to hold, just like that of the salmon.
The reasons for the decline are well understood, as are the solutions for their recovery. The people and government must have the political will to take action if the salmon are to be saved.
These watersheds are the key to the survival not only of fish and wildlife, but they're the key to survival finally of us. Because when species can no longer survive on this planet, that has direct impact on our quality of life. And finally, I believe, on the ability of our species to survive.
This really is the last chance for Pacific salmon. The fish have been beaten down for 150 years. They're still suffering from the tide of European settlement. We want to see people rise to the challenge of protecting America's very, very rich fishery heritage, in particular, the great heritage of our trout and salmon in the Pacific Northwest.
The Pacific salmon are an integral part of the history, culture, and economy of California, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington, and a key component in the ecosystem. The grandeur of their beauty and power has captivated man since the first tribes.
Salmon stocks are our relatives, just like all of the other resources that we experience within our surroundings. Specifically, salmon have played a very key feature among the Northwest Coast people. They were a very central element of our community and our society. Their demise has had very vast repercussions within our community. They were extensive within the mythological literature. We know that they were a very important and key feature of who we were and how we understood ourselves. Today, without all of these opportunities intact, where instead we have just a city, we have urbanizing watersheds, we have planned communities, we have everything but indigenous opportunity available to us. We feel a sense of loss and a need for creating a different future, I guess.
And when I was small, big enough to go to the creek by myself, there would be all kinds of salmon, all the salmon you needed. It wasn't any trick at all to get 2 or 3 salmon a day, and my mother would smoke it and take care of it. But there was lots of salmon. There was no end to salmon.
In the early 70s, when you could easily come out of this port, out of Eureka here, and go out maybe 10, 12, 14 miles offshore, and you'd find that clear water edge and set your gear. And many's a day where, you know, we'd just be in fish from the morning, from the time we drop our gear until at night when we finally get tired and we've gutted all the fish we can and we've got to head back in. But I tell you, it's really thrilling. You're working on a gurdy, hand cranking, and you can look down the line, you can look down below and see, you know, 4 or 5 fish hooked up down below, you know, still pumping on the wire. It's oftentimes I can sit back and reflect on days like that, you know, we're really going to miss. Those days apparently are gone for quite a while here. It's definitely a sad occasion, you know, going from the thousands and thousands of fish that were landed back in the 70s and early 80s to the situation that we've got ourselves in at the present time.
Personal income from commercial fishing has plummeted from $168 million in 1988 to $15 million in 1994. Salmon, steelhead, and cutthroat trout are also among the most prized sport fish. The local economies of the Northwest still rely on tourism related to angling. To sport fishermen, communion with nature is as important as catching fish, when fish can be found. In the 1920s, anglers could fish to their heart's content, for there was an abundance of salmon. Legendary author and sports fisherman Zane Grey describes his steelhead fishing experiences in the Cascades of Washington State.
We could look down on Deer Creek, beautiful green and white stream shining here, dark and gleaming there. It wound through a steep walled canyon. It was worth working for. What struck me at once was the beautiful transparency of the water and the multitude of the boulders, some of them huge. I sat on one huge rock and then another, content, absorbed in the music of the stream and the strange conformations of the smooth boulders, the color and current of the water, and the sense of the overshadowing mighty cedars. Deer Creek was the most beautiful trout water I'd ever seen.
Today, Deer Creek is but a ghost of its glorious past, running shallow and muddy. The steelhead trout so beloved by Zane are all but gone. Deer Creek typifies the state of many of the streams and rivers in the Pacific Northwest, waters the salmon call home. In just the past 20 years, their numbers have gone from millions to mere thousands.
One of the things that we know about these animals relative to historic numbers is we are only dealing with a small percent, maybe 5, 10, or 15% of the numbers that historically came back into many of these river systems.
There are actually 10 distinct species in the salmonid family, all in the genus Oncorhynchus: the chum, coho, pink, sockeye, and the winter, spring, and fall chinook. The coastal cutthroat and winter and summer steelhead trout are also in the salmon genus.
Salmon and steelhead are part of our legacy, a part of our heritage, and an important part of our ecosystem. Depending on the life history stage of these animals, they're eaten by a number of different predators. They serve as food for birds and otters and a number of other animals, including even some of the insects that they prey on. When these animals came back in historic numbers, when they were so thick that you could walk across their back, they brought back to these watersheds tremendous quantities of nutrients from the oceans. So we can see throughout their life history, these animals are a vital link in overall aquatic food webs, both in the ocean and in the stream systems.
Salmon are born in freshwater streams. After 1 to 3 years, they swim downstream to the ocean, where they range over thousands of miles as they feed, some growing up to 100 pounds. When they are ready to reproduce, they instinctively return to their home stream, traveling as far as 1,500 miles fighting the currents. Their success as a species is due to their unique life cycle, called anadromous, from the Greek to run up.
When salmon come into the river, they're like visiting royalty. They're these massive fish that come from the ocean, from the depths of the ocean, and carrying with them the strength, the size, and the power of something much larger. It's like a visitation of some higher force.
An important part of the behavior of salmon and steelhead to their cycle of life is their ability to home, their ability to come back to the streams where they were produced. We know that they do this when they come back up the river by using a sense of smell to find their home streams. And we think that part of their amazing success as a species has to do with this ability.
When the salmon finally reach their breeding grounds, they use the last of their energy to spawn. The female digs a nest called a redd, then lays her eggs, which are fertilized by the male. After spawning, the adult's life force is spent and they die. For spawning to be successful, the stream must meet exacting conditions. There must be enough water for the fish to migrate upstream. The gravels must be large enough and free of silt to allow oxygen flow through the eggs. Once the young fish emerge, there must be places for the young to find cover, and there must be vegetation along the banks to provide food and shade, for most salmon become stressed and can die in water over 70 degrees.
Although salmon and steelhead in streams have similar requirements everywhere, not every stream meets those requirements at exactly the same time of the year or in the same way. We get unique stocks of fish adapted to the particular stream requirements. This overall diversity of the various stocks helps ensure the survival of these animals in the future. So when for whatever reason we lose one of these stocks, some basin no longer gets coho salmon back or steelhead trout back, we have lost some unique genetic information. We have lost an opportunity for the future for that life history pattern to be continued.
Scientists have identified over 400 stocks of salmon in the Pacific Northwest, yet only 64 stocks are in a stable condition. The rest are either extinct or at risk of extinction.
Wherever you look in the country, you see crashing fisheries. You see these, what Bruce Babbitt likes to call environmental train wrecks. We're losing habitat, we're losing stocks, we're losing species. We're also losing the ability of our aquatic systems to generate clean water. This is a crisis that is finally starting to get some of the recognition it needs.
Salmon have been researched and counted for many years by government, academic and industry scientists and citizen volunteers. Using data from multiple studies, the Wilderness Society developed maps detailing the ranges and populations of the Pacific salmon.
We took an overall look at the status, distribution, and habitat conditions of all the major species of the salmon throughout the Northwest in order to really get a real broad perspective on what the condition of the salmon and their ecosystem really is overall in this region. We found that all except one of those 10 major species are either extinct or at risk of extinction across the majority of their historic ranges in the region.
While the ranges of all the Pacific salmon have shrunk, the plight of the coho shows the severity of these declines. As recently as the 1940s, there were still as many as 500,000 coho in California. Today, as few as 5,000 wild coho remain. The coho once thrived over 70 million acres of the Pacific Northwest, but they are now extinct in 60% of their original habitat, at risk of extinction in 35%, and stable in a meager 5%. These studies clearly indicate that not only has the range of the coho shrunk, but the fish are at risk of extinction even where they remain. The chum, chinook, and steelhead suffer similar fates. This crisis began over 100 years ago when the settlers first came to the Northwest. At the turn of this century, the rugged landscape and primitive technologies kept timber harvest to reasonable levels. In those early days, it took a crew of men over a day to fell a single massive tree. Teams of oxen dragged the hefty logs over skid trails to nearby rivers for transport to mills. Most of the mountainous landscape was inaccessible to these pioneers, and much of the forests remained essentially untouched. Commercial fishing also became key to the economies of the still largely uninhabited Northwest. Hundreds of millions of pounds of salmon were harvested, and thousands of jobs were created. Throughout the 20s and 30s, the need for wood increased, and steam power reached deeper into the forests. After World War II, the housing boom was on. To meet the demand, the timber industry logged wide tracts of forest, using heavy machinery to access steep slopes, and chainsaws to fall great numbers of trees. Trucks became the principal method of transporting timber to the mills, creating a massive network of roads. In the 50s and 60s, the salmon were still plentiful. Even into the late 70s and 80s, the fish seemed to be abundant. But by the 1990s, the crisis was fully realized. The salmon are victims of the 4 H's: harvesting, hatcheries, hydropower, and habitat loss. Although complex ocean conditions affect salmon population sizes, never before have their numbers been so low. The seas have been severely overfished for decades. In some instances, as much as 90% of the salmon were caught before they ever had a chance to reproduce.
An extremely important part of the environment of these animals is the ocean environment. It's where they grow the fastest, where they grow the largest. Their success overall as individuals is very much determined by their success in the ocean. However, this is an area that humans have the least opportunity to do any regulation or control other than our harvest of those animals while they're in the ocean.
The U.S. and Canada are still having disagreements about harvesting, leading to further overfishing. Over the last decade, the salmon harvest has been severely restricted in an attempt to restore their numbers. Yet stocks have not rebounded. Prior to the 1960s, most of the salmon caught were wild. However, in recent years, large-scale hatchery operations began to help the fisheries industry.
For a long time, it was felt that hatcheries were going to be the salvation of these animals, and we didn't need to worry about wild production because we could grow all the fish that we needed to in hatcheries and not be concerned about the habitat or natural production of these animals. Our 50-year track record here is not particularly impressive.
When we raise fish in a large facility such as these hatcheries, it's very, very important to remember that we're not dealing with interchangeable parts here, like an automobile assembly line. Salmon and steelhead stocks are adapted to their local river systems, so we must found hatcheries on wild fish from the local system. Hatchery fish are also raised at very, very high densities and therefore are more prone to disease than wild fish. Diseases can also be introduced as hatchery fish are moved around. Once hatchery fish are released into the wild, they sometimes pose a threat of communicating those diseases into wild fish populations. If those diseases that are introduced are not local to the drainage, then they can actually be quite serious in terms of effects on wild fish populations. This is not unlike the problem for introduction of diseases into the Native American population when white man colonized from Europe.
When millions of hatchery fish are mixed in with wild salmon, they may degrade the genetic strength of the naturally evolved salmon and mask the decline of the wild species. Hatcheries cannot be relied on to replace wild stocks, but only to supplement fisheries and to offset loss of spawning habitat blocked by hydropower dams. Dams block hundreds of miles of habitat and kill thousands of fish in their turbines. They also radically decrease the amount of water in the river when they divert flows for power, industry, and agriculture.
There are very few large rivers left in the country that are not dammed. Back in the beginning of the 1930s, we dammed the largest Pacific salmon nursery in the world, namely the Columbia River and its major tributary, the Snake River. The Snake River and the Columbia used to produce 16 million wild salmon annually, and today they produce fewer than 250,000. The major cause of that problem is the dams.
Although it has been recognized that dams harmed salmon populations, It was assumed that salmon from undammed rivers in forested watersheds would keep the populations healthy. Today we realize that salmon from these rivers are declining towards extinction as well. Of all these threats, the worst is the devastation of the forests, streams, and rivers so vital to the salmon.
The primary problem behind salmon extinction is the loss of habitat and the dysfunction of aquatic ecosystems, watershed ecosystems, if you will. To be sure, overfishing has been a problem, hatcheries are a problem, dams are a problem. All of those issues must be addressed, but the most fundamental problem is the incremental loss of habitat.
When we talk about salmon habitat, we're really talking about watersheds. The things that the salmon need in the stream depend on the conditions in the watershed. The stream is connected to the entire watershed, and the most direct connection is in that watershed plumbing system.
The earth absorbs rainfall like a sponge. The watershed holds great reservoirs of water in the soil, providing moisture for plants, which in turn help hold the soil to the ground. The soil slowly releases the water, which trickles through the ground, forming streams, which join to form rivers. This slow release supplies water during dry summers and prevents flooding during the wet winters. But when the vegetation is removed and the soil is compacted, the watershed can no longer soak up water. This creates both erosion and flooding.
The most important thing to maintaining healthy fish is maintaining healthy watersheds. And the most important thing to maintaining healthy watersheds is keeping the topsoils intact and productive.
The watersheds of the Pacific Northwest are among the most productive in the world, but the soils constantly wash off the hillsides.
Erosion risk is high throughout many of the areas of the Pacific Northwest for several different reasons. One is we have very steep topography with very mountainous terrain. So the rate of uplift or mountain building in this area has over thousands and even millions of years created a high erosion risk. Secondly, we're right on the Pacific coast, so we get lots of precipitation during the winter, and it comes very intensely during very short periods of time. Perhaps the over-imprint of heavy land use, mostly forest land use in the Pacific Northwest, has created a situation along our west coast which has produced very high rates of erosion, especially in the last 4 or 5 decades.
Research has shown that up to 80% of sediment that enters streams comes from forest roads after large storms.
Our data and a number of other studies have indicated a very drastic increase in the rate of landsliding and other erosion events with timber harvest. On certain rock types, there is up to 100-fold increase in landslide rates in clear-cut and roaded areas compared to parts of those basins which haven't been logged on similar geology, and this translates to over 1,000-fold increase in the volume of sediment which enters stream systems.
Roads cause erosion in several different ways, and the two primary ways are that they increase the rates of landsliding from especially steep forested areas where timber harvesting is the primary management activity. But they also cross hundreds and hundreds of stream channels as they traverse the landscape. We have literally 500,000 to 1 million earthen dams spaced all over our forest landscape, each one with a small hole in it, which is represented by the culvert. These all are subject to plugging and failure in the future, and when this happens, the stream crossings and all the dirt washes out of the stream channels and down into our salmon and fish-bearing stream channels. It's not a matter of if they will fail, it's a question really of when they will fail during the next large storm or a future large storm. There are two potential adverse effects of large amounts of fine sediments, sand-sized particles in a stream. If there is excessive amounts of fines, the water flow over the eggs through the nest can be reduced, and if it's low enough, the eggs will suffocate or the embryos will suffocate. Also, it can physically entrap them. These juveniles have to migrate up through the gravels in order to take up residence in the stream, and a lot of fine sands and sediments in there can physically entrap them, prevent them from emerging, and they stay in the gravel and starve.
There are an estimated 200,000 miles of roads in the forests of California, Oregon, and Washington. Although many of these roads are closed to traffic, they still contribute sediment to streams. The impact of logging and roads on the land has been so extensive that the only way to gain a perspective is from space, from Landsat satellites.
I've selected for these images some visible bands and some infrared bands because I wanted to mimic what our eye would actually see if we were 500 kilometers up looking down at the Earth. And this shows us what a tremendous impact man has had on this particular environment, a tremendous amount of clear cutting. This cut up here in the upper left part of the image is 4 square miles in size. We're almost zoomed in, close enough, not quite. We can zoom in again and see all the little logging roads connecting each one of these patches. It's an incredible network of logging roads in there. If you look closely, you can see a road going to every single patch. And when you then go back and look at the incredible patchwork, that tells you the incredible road network that had to be developed to do that. Then it takes us back to the erosion problems.
This widespread degradation of our watersheds over the last 50 years has left the hills in a fragile state. Compacted soils from road building and tractor logging, as well as loss of vegetation from harvest, creates potential increases in water runoff when it rains, causing extensive erosion. Minor storms can have major consequences in the lowlands. As sediment fills the rivers, the water has no place to go, leading to devastating flooding and ruined salmon habitat. The effects of intense storms combined with man's disturbance of the landscape was dramatically displayed in Northern California during the infamous 1964 flood.
Floodwaters continue spreading over southern Oregon and northern California, with many areas isolated from land transportation. Northern California rivers, swollen with record amounts of rain, are pouring across access routes, destroying bridges and inundating entire communities. Constantly rising, the swift currents repeatedly ram the weakening structure, and the bridge begins to tremble. One last powerful assault, and another obstacle to the rampaging waters is eliminated.
The '64 flood destroyed towns and altered all the waterways in Northern California, burying spawning grounds and shifting river courses.
We're here in Redwood Creek. This creek was famous for salmon and steelhead. 10,000 steelhead were estimated to be in here just after 1950. But logging in this watershed, followed by major storms, has really changed the nature of the riverbed and caused a major decline in the salmon and steelhead in this river. This stream, in its heyday, prior to the 1964 flood, was narrow and tree-lined with the big trees. And now it's very, very wide and open. And the reason that is because the nature of the riverbed itself has changed so much. Where there were formerly pools in this creek that were 15, 20 feet deep, today it's a rare pool in this stream that is more than 8 to 10 feet deep. It's all filled in. You can't expect to maintain Pacific salmon if your watershed conditions are in such bad shape that you're allowing tremendous amounts of sand, silt, and sediment to come off the hillsides and to move down through the stream channels.
While modern methods of timber production are less damaging to the environment and timber laws have been strengthened, unlimited demand from international markets has pushed the timber industry to harvest at increasingly rapid rates. Entire watersheds can now be cut in the span of a few years instead of decades. In 1990, all timber harvest was stopped on national forest lands for 2 years by Judge Dwyer of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because federal agencies were not protecting the salmon, spotted owl, or marbled murrelet. To address this ecological and economic crisis, President Clinton convened the Forest Conference in Portland, Oregon in April 1993.
How can we achieve a balanced and comprehensive policy that recognizes the importance of the forests and timber to the economy and jobs of this region? And how can we preserve our precious old-growth forests which are part of our national heritage and that once destroyed can never be replaced.
Following the conference, the President commissioned the Forest Ecosystem Management Assessment Team, FEMAT, an interdisciplinary group of 600 scientists. After exhaustive research, they produced the FEMAT report, which concluded that, among other problems, logging was related to the decline of the Pacific salmon. To prevent further species extinctions, the report recommended limiting logging on public lands, setting aside 162 key watersheds, assessing these watersheds, and then restoring them to prevent further degradation.
Fortunately, we still have, throughout the Pacific Northwest, throughout the range of salmon and steelhead, stream systems that are healthy, that are intact, that can function as refuges for these animals to maintain the genetic diversity so that when other habitat is restored or recovers on its own, these refuge areas, these key watersheds, can serve as the seed source for recolonization of other habitat, currently damaged or degraded habitat, as it again provides the conditions that these animals need.
Scientists call these remaining healthy areas refugia, for they are the refuges for salmon and other species at risk. However, out of 103 million acres of federal land in the 3 states, only 9 million, just 11%, are protected as key watersheds.
The roadless areas and the old-growth forests, interestingly enough, the ones that are unprotected, not in parks and wilderness, these are areas which the scientists tell us are the best remaining refuges for the salmon, areas where the are most secure in their habitat. But if those areas are going to be entered with roads and logging on those steep slopes, we could well lose some of those last remaining vital, high-quality habitats for the salmon.
Current plans in Congress are to salvage log approximately 3 billion board feet on public lands, including roadless areas. This level of logging is incompatible with FEMAT's guidelines to save salmon.
It is clear that there's a belief that they still need to get timber out of these forests, and they're trying to do that when the scientific evidence now that is stated very clearly in the President's own FEMAT plan by his own scientists are that these forests are much more degraded than they ever thought.
One of the challenges then to bringing back these animals to somewhere near historic levels or whatever the habitat now can support is, one, to make sure that the good habitat that we still have available, that we protect that, and in areas where we have degraded conditions, to the extent possible, try to restore that habitat. Very often, that activity is going to be outside of the stream itself. It's going to be up on the watershed, trying to stabilize erosion sources and so forth.
Once refugia in our national forests are set aside and protected, restoration can begin. The first step is to analyze the conditions of the land and rivers and identify hazards to habitat. A comprehensive study of a key watershed is being undertaken at the Forest Service Humboldt Watershed Analysis Center. Scientists are studying the geology, hydrology, vegetation, and history of Pilot Creek in the Six Rivers National Forest.
Now, to understand where sediment comes from and to try and prevent that from happening in the future so that Pilot Creek can recover and become a better refuge for anadromous fish, we need to understand the interactions between land use and erosion and sedimentation downstream. And to do that, we've put together information about the inherent properties of the landscape and tried to find out what kinds of things have caused these sorts of problems to occur. Once we find out what those relationships are, we are much better prepared to avoid those in the future. Doing an analysis so that we know as best we can how watersheds and ecosystems work is absolutely vital if we're to manage land sustainably, if we're to do restoration that makes a difference and that expends our scarce funds in the best possible way to provide the kinds of benefits that people want. It's absolutely imperative that we know what we're doing with our lands.
After watersheds are analyzed, treatments are prescribed. Removing erosion risks is the most important process, storm-proofing the watersheds from the effects of flooding. As roads contribute the most sediment to streams, they must be stabilized. This is accomplished primarily by using heavy equipment, the same machines that built the roads in the first place.
There's really two ways in which you storm-proof watersheds, and especially roads along watersheds. You can either remove the roads or you can upgrade them so that when a large storm and flood occurs, you won't have excessive erosion. Removing roads from a watershed is called road decommissioning. When you decommission a road, you excavate, you physically remove and excavate with excavators and bulldozers that material which was pushed over the edge of the road during road construction. The other thing that you need to do primarily along roads when you decommission or remove them is to excavate all the material that was bulldozed or pushed into the stream channels when the roads were built across the streams. If you take that material entirely out of the watercourse so that you reestablish the natural stream channel shape, then when a big flood occurs, you're not likely to expect any erosion in that area. The other thing you can do with road systems is to decide which roads you want to keep in a watershed. And on those roads, you need to upgrade them to make sure that they're going to weather the next big flood.
Many of these restoration techniques were pioneered at Redwood National Park, home to the world's tallest tree. In 1975, the Park Service both bought and traded lands to expand this world-renowned sanctuary. Before the redwoods were preserved, some of the land acquired in the expansion had been extensively roaded and logged. Park scientists have been working for the last 15 years to restore the land back to its original condition. By removing roads, digging out stream channels, and recontouring the land, the park is returning to its pre-disturbance state.
One of the things that changes very often when we have extensive modifications of a watershed or a stream is we simplify the streams. There is less wood, there are fewer pools, the riparian vegetation may be modified such that the streams become simpler. When they're simpler, they do not hold as many fish.
For the past 20 years, tremendous amounts of time, money, and effort have been spent putting boulders and logs into streams to provide cover and create deep pools. Workers often bolt these in-stream structures together so they remain in place during floods. However, these stream-based activities prove futile if the watershed is still eroding. The force of nature can wipe out these projects with one large storm.
Tens of millions of dollars have been spent over the last decades working in the lower portions of our watersheds, installing in-stream structures. We now realize that we have to start top to bottom in these watersheds. We contend that we shouldn't be doing any more of this in-stream structural work to speak of until we know what's the risk of sediment production on these hill slopes.
FEMAT scientists realized that in-stream structures and other Band-Aid solutions cannot help watersheds return to a natural, healthy condition if there are not areas of large trees, riparian zones, surrounding streams to provide shade, food, and cover. Salmon streams require 400 to 600 feet of healthy forest on either side of the stream. Many timber operations on private land leave little, if any, buffer strips of trees along streams. Restoring stream-side forests involves planting both fast-growing trees, such as willows, as well as larger, long-lived conifers, such as Douglas fir, cedar, and redwoods. Riparian restoration helps damaged stream environments return to their natural state, providing a long-term investment. While restoration is being undertaken in some areas, the FEMAT team estimated it will take over $400 million to restore watersheds and riparian zones throughout the Northwest. The administration has already committed hundreds of millions of dollars to streamside restoration, though not all this money has been appropriated.
The president's got to put his money where the mouth is, so to speak, and Congress has to do this also. They've got to fund this fully.
However, land management agencies must first ensure that key watersheds are preserved and restored, then prioritize other areas in terms of their value to fisheries. Watershed restoration also provides much-needed jobs to the economies of the Pacific Northwest.
This is a great opportunity for people who have been displaced by the loss of our timber production on these watersheds to actually get involved in the restoration program and to really take a great deal of pride in seeing how the landscape can be restored and we can renew our fisheries and then provide employment through almost a different direction than there has been in the past.
Of course, I liked logging when I was logging and road building, and I really enjoy being out in the woods, and it's kind of a different feeling when you're doing this kind of a project because you're putting something back into it. You're enhancing the forest, and it's a different feeling deep down.
Restoration projects are invaluable. However, without healthy forests, both public and private, the salmon will not survive. Yet privately held acreage is not regulated nor protected as strictly as public lands and have continued to be cut. 38% of salmon spawning and rearing habitat is located in our public forests, but the remaining 62% of salmon's habitat is in privately held forests. Timber is a vital industry in the Pacific Northwest, and communities are working to keep both the economy and the environment healthy. In Mendocino County, California, a prime timber growing area, the community has attempted to find a balance through regulating harvest with special county rules.
The reason Mendocino County saw a need to ask for increased regulation of harvesting on their timberlands was because it was clear to observers that there was overcutting was occurring, the pace of cutting was stepping up. There was great concern that the cutting was actually exceeding the growth rate of the trees. Younger and younger trees were being harvested, and that meant that future harvests were being lost. There was also great concern about the watersheds and the salmon because vast watersheds were being clear-cut.
The Board of Supervisors set up a Forest Advisory Committee. After 2.5 years of work, the FAC proposed setting up county forestry rules which would allow cutting on a percentage of the timberlands.
We predict that under our county rules, if they are enacted, that we would restore the productive use of the land, we would have more jobs, we would have larger logs, better timber, higher value products, higher taxes returned to the county, and a better economy in general.
The board approved the rules and submitted them to the California Board of Forestry for ratification.
Unfortunately, the Board of Forestry as a whole, while saying that we had done an admirable job presenting it, that there are irrefutable facts, voted no. I think one of the most simplest, profound statements that I heard about this was that it takes wood to grow wood. And if we want to have a good timber industry, then we'll have more trees. Changing our forest management practices so that we have more trees and larger trees over a larger area will not only help our economy, give us more timber products, and will also protect the salmon and other resources.
Other counties have proven that more closely regulated timber operations can be successful and protect wildlife and water quality. In Santa Cruz County, California, carefully governed logging allows 60% of harvestable trees over 18 inches in diameter to be selectively logged while sustaining both jobs and the forest.
Logging practices in Santa Cruz County and the regulations are made to benefit all users of the forest. The municipal uses of water are protected, the recreational benefits of fishing are protected, and the wildlife is protected by these regulations.
The forest regulations ensure the health of the system, while 3 viable mills provide jobs. The county maintains a sound economy, retains open space, provides clean water for the cities, and supports healthy habitats for future generations of fish and man.
What a logger can look at when he's in these forests is not only what he can log today, but what he can log tomorrow. These forests are available for the future and for the very near future for his purposes, and if he preserves this tree today, he'll be able to log it tomorrow.
Sustainable forestry and refugia are the keys to healthy watersheds upon which the salmon depend. Preserving salmon habitat requires strong environmental legislation. These laws are on the books, but are not being enforced. Our system of law guarantees protection of the public trust, ensuring the health of our forests, wildlife, and water. Yet, despite existing legislation, many timberlands continue to be extensively logged. In the California counties of Humboldt and Del Norte, the range of the old-growth redwoods, some 2,000 years old, have dwindled over the last 100 years. The 3,300-acre Headwaters Forest is the largest stand of old-growth redwoods remaining in private hands. The giant redwoods are worth up to $100,000 each. Yet the forest is also one of the last refugia for coho and marbled murrelet in California. Headwaters, owned by Pacific Lumber Corporation, is a legal battleground.
What has happened is that the war has moved from the public lands in some cases to private lands. And I, for one, do not want to be in the position 30 years from now of saying that we have now wiped out the remaining 3% of habitat simply because we didn't recognize the right of these creatures to exist on public and private lands, creatures which belong to all of us. I mean, they're publicly held resource. That means that even though they exist on private land as well as on public land, they are a publicly held trust, meaning that you own them and I own them. Certainly the landowners do not own the creatures themselves. The battle now over the Endangered Species Act is the breadth of what it does encompass. Unless you protect the home of the creature, and the creature is going to perish.
Other timber companies must also adhere to restrictions on harvest to protect wildlife on their lands.
It occurs to me that government always tends to overreact to pressures, and so they tend to be very prescriptive and very burdensome. It's always better to solve local problems at the local area, at the local issue, not top-down management. We certainly don't need Washington telling us how to manage our lands in Humboldt, California. We have the obligation as a private enterprise to not think of profit as a dirty word. We make money at our business, and we think that we have some of the best forestry management talent that we can find.
Overcutting on private lands has left only a few islands where coho remain. It is unclear if the listing of the coho will be invoked to protect these last refugia. Almost all of the federal legislation protecting salmon habitat on private land is now facing challenges in the Congress. Both the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act are up for reauthorization.
The Endangered Species Act was intended to be our first and most thorough law to address the issue of biological diversity. So it's our only tool for ensuring the genetic integrity and the habitat integrity of these geographically specific, evolutionarily distinct stocks of salmon. Today, the Endangered Species Act is under a tremendous amount of attack in Congress, in the media, in the business community.
We now hear from the 104th Congress that they want to revise the Endangered Species Act and that no more animals should be listed until we have better scientific studies and peer review. In the case of Pacific salmon, the scientific evidence is clear. My colleagues and I in the American Fisheries Society, and now federal scientists working for the National Marine Fisheries Service, have concluded that many stocks of Pacific salmon are at risk of extinction. The time to act is now. We don't need more studies or more peer review. We need to begin recovery of these animals and to protect their habitat where they still remain.
Despite the fact that coho are threatened with extinction, they are not yet listed under the ESA. The only protection they have is from the Clean Water Act, which ensures the beneficial uses of water for man and wildlife.
The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 to protect our rivers and lakes from pollution, and it's done a wonderful job in stopping industrial pollution that comes out of a pipe. Unfortunately, here in the Pacific Northwest, the Clean Water Act has failed to prevent pollution that stems from logging in the form of sediment. And its scientific evidence is clear that we're losing our fish as a result. Congress is now considering weakening the Clean Water Act, when in fact, we need just the reverse. We need it to be strengthened.
While the Congress debates these acts, Americans are initiating their own projects to bring the salmon back to their neighborhood streams.
The challenge of bringing back these animals is really a challenge for all of us. It's going to take the involvement of the wide cross-section of the community, the watershed, the people that live in a watershed, to make the world safe for salmon and steelhead again.
I think the only reason we have even begun to turn the great ship, so to speak, in a new direction is because of the involvement of the citizens of this region and the nation, and I think that they play a key role, the key role. The federal agencies are not going to solve this problem, so citizens are vital.
Individual landowners can apply for state and federal funding to restore their property. One such project is taking place on a ranch in Northern California.
We came out one day when it had been raining for weeks, and we noticed that a bunch of our big oak trees were no longer visible from the field. And we went down to the creek, and over 200 feet of stream bank had disappeared, along with our big old trees. And I actually stood there with tears in my eyes. I was just so stunned to see all these big old oak trees gone. That was really the beginning of our involvement with trying to get these creeks functioning in some proper way again. We talked to the Soil Conservation Service, and we found that, in fact, there is grant money really for almost any landowner. And by using the bioengineering methods, which always use lots of live plant materials, we've managed to get overhanging shade and insect habitat and root systems binding the cobble together, so we get the kind of spots that fish really like to hang out in. And we've increased that by many hundreds of times from what it was back in 1982. And we're gratified every summer to see all these little fish hanging out there. You know, it makes us happy, it makes the kids that come here happy. It's just a healthier situation.
Volunteers are also essential. Communities often work with national conservation organizations to restore local streams, even those near cities. Lagunitas Creek in Marin near San Francisco is a vital coho habitat. A combined effort of volunteers organized by Trout Unlimited, local agencies, and landowners has preserved spawning grounds for up to 500 coho. The project is a success because citizen involvement prevented erosion, improved habitat, and increased flows from reservoirs.
A lot of people think that watershed restoration work is something that happens out in the hills, somewhere distant from where they live in their little cities or towns. But in fact, we all live in a watershed of one type or another, and most of us don't know what the name of the creek or watershed that we live in, and that's a good starting point for people in cities, to find out what the name of the creek is and what watershed they belong in. The work that we do in urban stream areas has a far greater chance of actually educating the public. The work we do there is right in front of their eyes. They can see the results of it. Maybe we only get 5 or 10 fish back, but if the system comes back alive and it starts rejuvenating itself, then that's of value.
If the Clinton Forest Plan has any chance of saving our remaining ancient forests and the salmon and wildlife that they support, it's critical that all citizens participate in the implementation process. The Wilderness Society published a citizen action guide to the Clinton Plan that comes with a workbook and maps that explain the details of the plan that enable everyday citizens like me and you to get involved in the implementation process. It's very important that people, especially in the affected region, get out on the ground with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to see what's going on. It's easy to see dirt in the streams, easy to see when trees are knocked down. You don't need to be a scientist to see bad forestry. We need public participation. It's the keystone of implementation of this plan if our resources are to be protected for future generations.
There's a tremendous amount of work to be done in grassroots citizen support, citizen lobbying on these issues is really going to make the difference. Get involved by telling your congressmen and your senators what you want to see in the reauthorization of those laws. You want stronger laws, that you want better protection for aquatic species like Pacific salmon, and tell them that in addition to stronger laws and better protection, that they need to make a serious commitment to appropriating the monies necessary to make the new programs work. Just remember, fish can't write and fish can't vote, but you can. A few of you can make a bit of a difference, and a number of you can make a tremendous difference in ensuring the future for Pacific salmon.
I really believe that we will have these animals in the future, but we can't be expecting to see immediate returns. I think we need to take the perspective of the response of these animals to improved conditions will still require decades. But without a change, we can expect to see the trends that we're seeing elsewhere continue, which is the disappearance of these animals.
I do see a hope. I think we will, if we do this, if we really organize ourselves effectively and make a public commitment, a real, clear, strong public commitment. We have a chance of saving many, many salmon. Not all, but we have a chance to do that. And said differently, what choice do we have but to work hard at this? Our futures are at stake. This is about us. It's in our own self-interest to be working on these issues.
Saving the salmon will be a challenge, for our environment is in a perilous state. There is no time to lose. By ensuring the health of our forests, we can reduce erosion and flooding, provide clean water and jobs, and bring about the salvation of not only these noble animals, but ultimately ourselves.
I recognize in the salmon a symbol of the majesty of the Pacific Basin, as it were, a symbol of the power of the planet, and as an indicator species of the health of the whole system. And it's the health of the whole system that we must restore in order to survive, in order to keep intact the weave of creation, and in order to live the kind of lives that we set out to try to live. It has fallen to those of us who love the salmon and who love the place we live beyond other affections we might have to act out this responsibility by helping to guarantee that that which we love will survive.